Welcome to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Mini First Aid are the UK's leading family first aid provider, and we are delighted to bring our latest podcast series to you, giving you all the information that you need around family health subjects. Thanks for joining. Series 3 of the Family Health podcast is sponsored by Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Savlon Scar Prevention Gel speeds up healing, helps soothe pain, and reduces the likelihood of scarring when used on minor wounds, superficial burns, and grazes. And to be frank, with my 6 children in my house, cuts, scrapes, and grazes are plentiful. So my first aid kit, saviour, is Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Well, hello, I'm Kate, and I'm the founder of Mini First Aid. Welcome to our podcast, Family Health by Mini First Aid. We are so pleased that you've taken the time to listen to our podcast. Whether you're in the car, cleaning the house, or relaxing with a cuppa, our Family Health podcast covers a huge range of topics that might affect one of your family members. And if you've ever had a family health concern and you're thinking, oh, I'll just Google that, have a listen to us instead. Now, for today's podcast, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our guests this week, Lou Matera and Dan Richardson from Youth Sport Nutrition. Both Lou and Dan have worked extensively with young athletes. Lou at Newcastle United, and Dan is still at our local club. He's there today, Leeds United, working as their academy nutrition lead. So guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you do. Lou, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me first and foremost. Looking forward to the conversation, Kate. So my name is Lou. I am CEO and founder at Youth Sport Nutrition. I set up the company in 2015. Took maybe 2 or 3 years to kind of get to R&D and start the product. But long story short, we're on a mission to eliminate youth undernourishment globally.
Fascinating. And I want to know loads about it. I'm going to grill you today. Come on then, Dan, tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me on today, Kate. I'm Dan. I'm a performance nutritionist. I suppose one of my many hats is working at Leeds United's academy from the under-9s all the way through to the 21s. So I get to see that full kind of developmental phase of a footballer. But in addition to that, I obviously work with Youth Sport Nutrition as part of their education arm, delivering to all different clubs, schools and athletes to promote better performance nutrition and practices when it comes to growth and development.
Why is then, Dan, nutrition so important for teens and pre-teens? Are there differences once children get to this age? Is there sort of things that we need to be thinking about for their diets?
Definitely. I think arguably one of the biggest things is that we often follow the government guidelines for nutrition, which is absolutely correct in terms of keeping somebody healthy. But what that doesn't always factor in is the exercise and the maturation side of, I suppose, high performance sport or even just general exercise and activity. And a lot of the conversations I have with parents is how do we actually go about, delivering on that from a nutrition perspective. If we just ate as normal and we didn't manipulate our food intake to support our activity levels, we'll find ourselves undernourishing our bodies as pre-teens and teens. I think more so in the teens as, sport tends to ramp up a little bit more and we tend to be more exercise-orientated active as opposed to physically active. We need to look towards mapping and managing our nutrition. And I'm sure we'll dive into a lot of that today in terms of, top tips and tricks for parents to be able to support their young teens. And I think when it comes to pre-teens, it's more around that physical activity of the growth and development and actually, kids explore, especially in pre-teens. And it's making sure we're fueling that exploration, whether that's sport or other activities, and ensuring that that energy is available for them to utilise.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess for Lou, that's the whole premise of where your business came from, wasn't it? What are the challenges that preteens and teenagers face when it comes to getting the right nutrition then?
I think like with most problems, it boils down to 3 things, and it's normally time, quality or cost. I think you've got the added nuance for youths of fussy eating. It's quite hard, but very common, and parents have to contend with it. They don't have the discernment of an adult. Say an adult can, if something doesn't taste nice, it's not a problem because they know it's good for them. Whereas a kid, if it doesn't taste good, it's not going in. So you've got fussy eating, you've got time, which is also quite a big concern for parents, particularly so if they're running, they're living full-time jobs. They've got the school run, and they've got the training run. Sometimes that's like 5 o'clock in the morning. Particularly so if they're in swimming or late evening training. I remember from my time at the football club in Newcastle, some parents would commute. I think the worst was just over 2 hours there and back.
Right, okay.
And that's 3 or 4 times a week plus match days on the weekend. So it's very, very difficult for them to fit in the nutrition side of things, because it always kind of boils back down to preparation and obviously the knowledge of kind of the best foods to have and at the right time. We've obviously got nutrient availability in terms of like what's actually available for kids when they're with parents and when they're not. So are they getting things from vending machines? What are the quality of the school dinners or packed lunches looking like? The parents have the capacity and ability of knowledge to kind of cook and prepare and transport that, and then will the kids actually eat it at the right time? And obviously with everyone experience the cost of living as well, that can also make a little bit more of a barrier to entry. Because sometimes the right or better foods generally cost more as well. So they're all topics that I was like hyper aware of and wanted to provide some sort of solution that ticks as many boxes as possible.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I mean, I'm a mum of a teen and a preteen, and you suddenly lose this complete control over what your children are eating because they go and make their own choices, but also because, quite frankly, their social life and their sport and all their activity schedules is something, it's ridiculous. I need to hire someone to manage it. But because of that, we're always on the go. So that piece when you said, people are travelling, and I've got pals who've got children in football academies and they're sticking them in the car straight from school and driving over from Leeds to Manchester or Sheffield or wherever they're going, or it's a trampolining competition on a Saturday afternoon and they've got to jump in the car already having been to ballet. And that's a real challenge because consciously as a parent, you want to feed your kid stuff that's good for them. I was going to ask you actually, Dan, about breakfast and packed lunches for this age range for children. And bearing in mind, as Lou said, that teens can be a bit fussy. What's ideal? What should they be eating?
It's always the best question as a nutritionist to get, I think, is, what is the ideal breakfast or packed lunch? And I think we need to pull ourselves away a little bit from what ideal is, because everybody's ideal can be different.
Okay.
Teens, preteens can be fussy, but arguably we just need to be ensuring that we're getting energy into the body. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to go and load up on some of the high sugar cereals that we see out on the market, because inevitably that's going to result in potentially a sugar crash or not long-lasting energy across the day. So the main focus for breakfast is looking for long-lasting energy. So whether that comes from oats, from wholemeal or whole grain breads, would be the ideal solution to that. I had a really good conversation with a parent recently around how their child loved cereal and needed to find something that was close to, and the Weetabix minis tend to be kind of like a really good opportunity, or some form of wheat biscuit as well, because it's then not pumping the body full of sugars, but actually giving it long-lasting carbohydrates to go throughout the day. And I think that kind of speaks volumes with the packed lunch as well, in terms of what you want to look towards having. Trying to go towards sandwiches that are whole grains, or wraps that have got whole grains in, with a good hit of protein, and of course some fruit and veg around that. And it doesn't have to be something that's in essence fancy or over the top. We can just keep it super simple and take, I suppose, some of those classic breakfast and lunch ideas and just make them a little bit more healthy by adding whole grains for long-lasting energy, lean protein sources, and some form of fruit and veg to keep up our micronutrient, vitamin and mineral content.
Great. And I guess you need to help your kids understand what those are so that they recognise it and they can go and choose it. Because, when Lou was saying about, that it's vending machines at school, or it's a counter with everything on display, and they need to know what they're picking and choosing.
Absolutely.
And make that right choice. Talk to me, Lou, about illnesses then, and how kids' nutrition can impact whether kids get better quicker or not when they're unwell. How does that overlay into illnesses and nutrition?
I think Dan's probably best to answer this.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've got a lot of thoughts of it just purely from a practitioner's perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
From my side, it's just all kind of focus on vitamin C, vitamin D, and kind not being reactive, being a lot more proactive to ensure it's not like you're not just having vitamin C when they're ill. But yeah, Dan, you've been able to shed a lot more light on that.
Go on, Dan. Tell us what you think.
Absolutely. I think, it's one of those where I feel like we're still in winter, although we're coming towards May now. I think checked this morning as I got in the car and it was 5 degrees. So very jealous of Lou over in a nice sunny location compared to us in Leeds. But, it is one of those where, winter illnesses do stick around a little bit longer when we have colder weather. And I think in terms of looking towards nutrition and the link with it, there's a lot around, I hate the word boosting the immune system, and you see it a lot online when you go and Google any kind of topics around health and wellness. It's about boosting your immune function. Well, arguably we can't boost the immune function. We can support it and we can make sure that we're getting the most optimal immune function, but we can't boost it. And looking at our fruits, ideally our citrus fruits, which will give us more vitamin C naturally instead of opting towards a supplement, is the ideal scenario. So maybe increasing our citrus fruit intake will be beneficial. And then one of the other ones that I think is quite a grey area, because, for young, growing and developing teens and preteens, we don't necessarily talk about supplements because it is one of those topics where, if we can, we go food first. But vitamin D is one of those supplements that we can get in terms of, because we only really get it through sunlight and some of our foods. So roughly speaking, around 80% of our vitamin D intake comes from sunlight. And I know, as well as you will, is being in Leeds, we don't get much sunlight. And if we do, we're normally fully clothed with long sleeves on like I am today. Yeah. And that's about it. And actually, we struggle to absorb all of that from the sunlight. So potentially opting for some form of team-friendly vitamin D is some good way of increasing our immune function. But in addition to that, it's looking towards, the simpler things again. Are we getting enough energy in the body to fuel our days? Because fatigue is the biggest cause of, suppressing our immune function. So are we having enough food to fuel what we're doing in the day? And in addition to that, are we making sure that it's coming from good sources of carbohydrates that's going to give us long-lasting energy too?
Brilliant. It's brilliant because I think, that the illness thing, particularly, I don't know whether it's all just been that we've had a difficult winter this year, but it just seems to snowball and it just seems to go round kids round and round and round and they're indoors more, etc. And you think, I guess, can their diet just be a preventer as such? So it is, so you can give your kids a supplement. That's actually a thing that effectively you can do to support them if you want to. Is that right?
Yeah, so with vitamin D, it's the only real one that, of that age group that I'd be recommending a form of supplement, only because we know from the prevalence data and the research that we can't absorb enough vitamin D, and most people in the UK, surprisingly, are vitamin D deficient, which has a negative effect on our immune function. So, unlike vitamin C, we can increase our citrus fruit intake that will improve our vitamin C intake. Unfortunately, with vitamin D, we're very hard done by in terms of the foods aren't always that bioavailable in terms of getting the nutrients from there. So we have to look towards potentially a team-friendly supplement in vitamin D.
Great. Okay. And we talked about food and supplements. Let's talk about a drink, because we all hear that I'm sat here with my big glass of water, and we're all told that we've got to drink a couple of litres of water a day as a minimum. We're all sat here. We're all there. We're good. How do we make sure our kids drink enough water, or, and can they have juice? Is that a thing? Are they allowed?
I think there's a few reasons, and it's super important. If you turn the clock back and we focus more on the preteens, again, they naturally struggle with hydration because they don't have the same thermoregulation capabilities as an adult. Basically means they don't sweat. So particularly so in the summer months, it's very easy for them to overheat because they can't self-regulate.
Yeah.
So it's super, super important for them to stay hydrated. And we know as humans, we're 60% water anyway. So the brain relies on adequate hydration to function. So it's just building in little hacks, if you like, into your kids' lives where they're a lot more aware of that. So just something as simple as giving them a water bottle, a refillable water bottle to carry on with them every day. Don't forget to keep it clean as well. Wash it like once or twice a week. So just little things like that, but it is super important. But sometimes they will shy away from it in favour of things like fizzy drinks or sugary drinks, because water, it's boring, it doesn't taste good. So it's just trying to help them understand that. Dan, have you got any thoughts, particularly around the juice side as well?
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with you there, Lou, about, carrying a water bottle at all times and, making sure that they're taking little and often sips. It's never about, with hydration, having a large bolus of water in one period of time.
Okay.
It's about spreading it out evenly across the day. And, sometimes as parents, just tipping that reminder or making sure there's the water bottle's full at meal times, for example, when they are at home. In terms of juices, again, they get a bad rap because tends to be a lot higher in sugars. And what we are finding now is a lot of juices are fairly processed. And I'm sure we'll come on to the topic of processed and unprocessed foods in today's podcast. But ultimately, we want to be avoiding processed foods where possible. So unless it's a natural fruit juice that we're looking towards that isn't kind of, pre-packed in a carton and is freshly squeezed, then ideally we want to be avoiding those kind of drinks and opting more towards water for better hydration, and also avoiding any kind of sugar and blood glucose spikes from there as well. So, trying to encourage more water intake is always going to be the best way to do so. And as Lou said, carrying a water bottle is the most easiest and simple way of doing so.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. And I guess because of the nature of your jobs for both of you, I'm absolutely fascinated to talk about kids' nutrition, particularly if they do a lot of sport. And I said at the front end of the podcast is that our kids' busy activity lives now are bonkers. We are offered the most amazing range of activities for our children, whether they do it professionally or semi-professionally because they're at the top of their game, or whether they're like my kids and they just enjoy doing lots of activities. Why is nutrition so important for kids that are active?
I'll take this one if you want, Dan. So if we're specifically focusing on that kind of youth athlete population, what we have to remember is they have to balance participation in high level sport on top of school, on top of PE, homework, their social life, which is fine, but you have to remember they're also transitioning through periods of rapid growth and development. That's the difference. And it's not about kind of muscle mass or weight loss or anything like that. It's them going from this high to this high really quick. So it's all focused on structural growth and development. So the growth phase naturally places a heightened focus on the diet and nutrition because so important for them to fuel and refuel properly. They have certain high needs for growth-related nutrients, for structural development. Again, focusing on the typical ones like calcium, vitamin D, phosphorus, magnesium. And if they're not getting this in, this is obviously naturally going to impact their ability not to just perform. That's like a secondary objective, but it's more so we're looking at longevity, we're looking at normal growth and development, and then tie it back into overall success in sport. And if they get this wrong, not only will it impact like energy levels, their school performance, but then it can also lead to issues in later life, particularly so structurally, if they have or carry some sort of deficiency that they're not aware of, but it's just a certain food group or type or like some sort of nutrient availability that they can't have, that can then have second, third or fourth order consequences in later life. For example, young females, really big focus on these at the moment. Once they start menstruating, they go through puberty, they naturally have a high need for iron.
Right.
Again, I think that's such a huge... I remember reading a report not long ago. It was something between 70 and 90% of young females in sport who have an iron deficiency. So eating foods high in iron is really important. The problem is those foods that are high in iron sometimes can be problematic if they're following like a certain diet, or if it's the typical green leafy veg, which doesn't taste so good for them, that you then have to try and trick and kind of sneak into their diet. And again, link that back to sport, it's linked to blood oxygen transport. So if that's not adequate, it's going to impact their energy levels. They're going to be more fatigued. There's a lot more issues with red S as well, if you want to kind of deep dive that with that. So yeah, it's super important for them to get it right, but it's just so challenging for parents because they meet that resistance from kids around if it's not tasting good, or if like they don't really understand the reason why. It's easy for kids to kind of rule the roost a little bit and they dictate what will or they won't have.
Brilliant. And I guess, Dan, when you're working with families in your role at Leeds United, and you said, I've been talking to parents, or I advise parents, if you're particularly at a time where it's match day or there's big events coming up, what's the tips that you're giving parents to make sure that their children are ready nutritionally for them to do that level of sport?
Yeah, it all sometimes depends on the age. If, we're looking at preteen or like younger teens, then, potentially it's just ensuring they've got enough food and they're not skipping any meals and staying hydrated in the days leading up to it. But if we're looking more towards maybe the later teens where they're a bit more focused or centric around their performance, we'd kind of look towards a match day 3 structure. So probably quite new to a few people listening to this in terms of what a match day -3 structure looks like. But ideally, we talk about the week leading up. Well, in pro sport, we talk about the 3 days prior and then the match day being the day itself. So -1, let's say we're playing on a Saturday. If it was some sort of big cup final, it might be that we're looking towards, -1 would be Friday, -2 Thursday, and -3, of course, Wednesday. And when we look at -3, we'd be considering that kind of individual preparation for the teen. So making sure that they're not skipping any meals, staying really well hydrated, keeping on top of their fruit and veg intake, but not necessarily adjusting anything in terms of the foods that they'd normally eat, sticking to the same foods and making sure that they're promoting best kind of health practices. On -2, getting a little bit closer towards the final, we might start to look to increase our carbohydrate intake a little bit. And the reason why we do this is because, yes, we've got a big cup final potentially coming up on the Saturday, but also when we're looking more towards the Thursday, we may still have training that we need to account for and use, energy for. So maybe in every meal, we'd start to look towards ensuring we've got carbohydrates present. If usually we maybe don't have many carbohydrates at lunch or in our evening meal, that's a good time to start adding a little bit extra in there. And again, staying consistent with fluid intake and, of course, our fruit and veg intake. And then finally, once we've kind of gone through our individual prep -3, our transitional phase, as we like to call it at Leeds, on -2. -1 is then what we consider our loading phase. Now, if let's say it is football, because it's a great example while I'm sat here in a Leeds United top in one of the offices, they're not marathon runners. They are only doing 90 minutes on a pitch. So we don't need to load up as if we're going to go and do the Tour de France or a triathlete or, some form of marathon. We don't need, excess volumes of carbohydrates to get through 90 minutes of football. What we do need is a slight awareness and increase of the carbs that we consume. So the recommendations I give is every meal and every snack needs to include some form of long-lasting carbohydrates. So that's not having snacks that are full and loaded with sweets on -1 or sugars. It's looking towards whole grains and long-lasting energy that's going to lead into that match day on the Saturday. And then I'm sure we can get in a little bit later into how we'd structure a match day in terms of food and fuel. But it would be, again, similar to how we do -1, ensuring that, breakfast has a good hit of carbohydrates alongside plenty of fruit and veg. And then I suppose if we are looking towards more snack-based stuff, we'd want to be aiming for fruits and dried fruits over kind of sweets and sugary snacks.
Can you, just from a quick question from me, where I was thinking,
Yeah.
are kids on board with it? Do they go, yeah, okay, I get this and I know why I've got to do it and I know it's good for my body? Do they understand?
Yeah, so to be honest, I quite literally a conversation I was over in Cambridge yesterday at school, and we were saying how difficult it can sometimes be to engage, especially like primary school age or early secondary school age students into nutrition. I think I've said that in a very wordy way, but obviously there's a lot of nice, pretty infographics that come with it when delivering it to the younger audience. But I think when we tie nutrition with sport, it becomes a lot easier to sell it to them, because we're looking more so what are the kids interested in? Well, they're interested in performing well or feeling good on the pitch. And that feeling of success, I suppose, within sport is always something that's going to grab the attention of most children. So especially in like an elite academy setting, you're going to get a lot of children that want that extra 1 or 2% advantage. And if that's to focus a little bit more in their nutrition and build some healthy habits around it, then absolutely, I think I get a lot of buy-in. One of the hard sides of it, I think, is more so when sport isn't such a big factor. And actually, that's where we've got to start looking towards other motivations. And I think just giving the child choice. I know Lou mentioned previously about fussy eaters, but, I think as parents, we often give too much choice and give in to those kind of foods that maybe aren't the best. But it is giving choice, but not kind of giving in, I think is my definition for a fussy eater is, giving them an option of A and B for healthy, so they feel as though they've got a little bit of autonomy over their foods, but then also not then giving in to them going and getting a takeaway or some sort of form of unhealthy food instead, and almost providing them with healthy alternatives to those meals as well could be quite beneficial.
So that is a really good segue into saying what's a no-no. So what should we not let pass the lips of our children and our teenagers? What would you say is an absolute no? And you might want to tell me about some UPFs now, I'm sure.
Do you want me to jump into this, Lou, straight away, and then I'll pass it over to you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of no-nos, in nutrition, I'm always reluctant to call something an absolute no, because, you know, everything in some form of moderation is fine. However, there is certainly products in which that we want to be avoiding. And I think there's often, I suppose, obvious and less obvious no-nos when it comes to specifically snacking, really. And I think, you know, when we look at snacks and foods, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, you know, the very high sugar content foods that are potentially not just harming to our health, but also to our teeth and our dental decay. You know, I believe it's something along the lines of 1 in 3 children that are administered to hospital between the ages of 7 and 10 is due to a dental health issue.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And I think those leaving school as well, from a perspective of primary school into secondary school, I can't remember the exact stats, but I think it might be 1 in 3 as well, go to secondary school overweight due to the snacking habits and the food habits that they've created during primary school. So in terms of no-nos, I'd say anything that's highly processed or high in sugars. Now, the obvious ones are obviously looking towards like your chocolate, crisps, biscuits, sweets. Yes, we can have them in moderation, but we want to be finding healthy alternatives alongside it. But I think sometimes there is an element where some of the no-nos aren't as obvious. So for me, it tends to be like your, yogurt-coated yogurt-coated flakes, or potentially like, kind of your fruit roll-ups, or your kind of like your fruit puree bars that tend to be quite highly processed and contain a lot of sugars. You know, if you look at the back of some of the ingredients on some of the snacks that you may be buying for your children, half of them you won't be able to understand.
Yeah, sure.
But the minute you go and buy a bag of raisins and you look at the ingredients in there, it says 100% raisins. You kind of know what your child's getting there. So I think the further away from processing we can get, the better it is for, you know, our overall nutritional value of foods. So my no-nos would be those that have got very long ingredients lists when actually they should only really have 2 or 3 ingredients. And I'm sure, Lou, you'd be able to shed some more light around that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm with you on that, Dan. I don't think there's any definitive no-nos. I think we inherently know, I'm not speaking as a parent, but in general, if something is good or bad or right or wrong or healthy or not healthy. So sometimes it's just using your discernment. But then equally, you don't want to be too stringent on this, because you want to take more of a holistic approach. You don't want to kind of deny your kids from like having a nice time or like taking away all the sweets, but can you flip it in a way where this is something that they have to earn? Is there a way, say, for example, after sport, when they are going to be depleted and they do need to top up those energy stores, is there a way that you can maybe sneak in some Haribos and just be a little bit more creative with it, make them work for it a little bit, instead of McDonald's being the go-to after every training day? Can it just be, I don't know, a treat once a month or once every 2 months? You know what I mean? It's just trying to think about it so that you're not, because you want them, you need their buy-in essentially as parents. You need them on board with it. You don't want them to harbor any resentment. You don't want them to say, "Oh, the other kid's getting this or not having this," and feeling a bit left out. So just thinking outside the box a little bit, and then just using your discernment when it comes to what you're buying them, because most decisions, it's not when you're hungry and in the house. The problem starts when you're in the supermarket. So it's just making better, more informed choices that, because we're driven by convenience, you're less likely to actually go out and buy a chocolate bar if you've got one in the cupboard. Whereas if you just don't buy it in the first place, you're much more likely to actually sit back and maybe prepare something. Just encouraging kids just to think outside the box. And then also look at the fact that, maybe sit down, align and address their vision. I'm specifically talking about kids in sports as well. So do they have their idol? Do they have their kind of, is it like Olympic gold? And then can we model the traits of the greats? Can we stand on the shoulders of giants? Say Marcus Rashford, is he going to be having this? Probably not. Do you want to kind of get that 1%, 2%, 3% ahead, particularly in sports where they're winning such fine margins? Say, for example, swimming. Let's take hundreds of thousands a second. If you've got 2 athletes of the exact same genetics, exact same training ability, one of them looks after the nutrition, the other one doesn't, it's very clear the one who's going to win. So just maybe sitting them down and helping them understand that a little bit might help.
Yeah, great. That's fascinating. And you talked, Dan, about the preparation in run-up to big sporting events. What about on the day then? Because you alluded that, you know, we could talk about actually on the day, but also I've got a little extra question on the day, which is that sometimes nerves come into play and children don't want to eat. I've got my big performance, I've got my big ballet show, or I've got my big gym competition, or my swimming race. So what should kids be having to eat on those big sporting days, and how can you get around those nerves as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all starts with preparing the night before, or at least a few days before, as we've mentioned, which then takes the emphasis off the food that we require on the actual day of the event. If we've, so to speak, quote unquote, loaded up on our food intake and our energy, we'll have available energy to perform at our best. It's more about topping it up on the day. So, you know, a steady breakfast would always be, you know, my recommendation, you know, some carbohydrates, proteins and some fruit. Again, if we're used to having Weetabix for breakfast, or we're used to having, you know, an egg with, you know, egg on toast or whatever, keep it simple. You know, never change anything just because it's a big day of performance. Always stick to the foods we're familiar with, because actually that's going to settle the stomach a lot more if we're used to eating certain foods. Okay. And then I think in addition to that, if we're looking at kind of how we build to that big performance, I think one of the big areas for me would be to focus on like a 90, 60, 30 rule is what we like to call it. So 90 minutes before is your last big kind of opportunity to get a high energy food in, and make sure that we're well fueled for it. And then following that, 60 would then be kind of a smaller snack, so potentially a piece of fruit, just to keep us ticking over. And then 30 minutes before would be kind of the opportunity, as Lou said, to get that kind of high sugar snack in if we require it, just to boost our energies and potentially buffer the use of the carbohydrates to the latter phases of, you know, our performance. So looking towards kind of building up towards that. In terms of stuff to avoid on, I suppose, a big match day would be like any foods that are high in saturated fats, because they can take a lot longer to digest. And actually that can have, you know, a causality effect of, I suppose, playing into the nerves and the anxiety. And I'm sure Lou will be able to cover a little bit more around kind of the nervous eating side, as well, as I know you deal with that a lot at YSN, and your products can often help with that.
Yeah, it's we get it quite a lot, where kids say they've got like a big event, they've got a big match, they've got to get up early, they've got butterflies, they don't want to have like a big meal because they just don't have the appetite. It's not there, it's suppressed. So sometimes things like smoothies are quite good because they can just drink it, they don't have to chew, it's quick, it's easy. The main thing I always tell parents as well is don't have or try anything new on match day, because it's not tried, it's not tested. It's another variable for the kids to have to think about and contend with. So yeah, I think smoothies are quite a good one. But just trying to get the timing right as well. Like you don't want to have, say, a shake 15 minutes before your event. You know what I mean? You've got to try and plan ahead a little bit, and try not to be as reactive. That's all I would say. And it doesn't have to be like super complicated, but it's just encouraging them that, listen, if we want to do well today, we've got a big match, we've got a big meet coming up. We have to be properly fueled in order to perform well. So again, just thinking outside the box a little bit and encouraging them.
Brilliant. Lou, I want to ask you particularly about the youth sport nutrition products, because we met at an event a while back and we were talking about children's sport and some of the challenges around time, and that parents are chucking their kids in the car to get them to big events, and that our kids are performing at this top level if our kids have made it to sort of some of the elite in their area of sport. And you really uncovered a gap, didn't you, around what should be happening in nutritional support for kids. So tell me a little bit about what you do, the range of shakes and what have you, because it was completely new on me and I find it absolutely fascinating.
Okay, yeah. So we can wind the clock back a little bit if you want. So I'm a sports science graduate. I worked as assistant strength and conditioning coach in Newcastle United, and I started with the youth academy. So I witnessed firsthand, as I said towards the start of the recording, parents coming, they're doing the commute. Kids are kind of going max out, strength and conditioning first, then they've kind of got the training, and then they're kind of whisked back home. Sometimes 2 hours on the way back. It's very difficult. Parents are very governed by convenience. And some parents as well can be really militant when it comes to their kids' performance, and they're always trying to get an edge. They're always saying, what can I do to make them grow faster, when's he going to fill out, or she needs to be a certain weight, which just from like an ethical, moral perspective, it can always be quite problematic ethically. So just something to be aware of. But because parents are so driven by convenience, they would just go for fast foods. They would get vending machine snacks because they tick all the boxes. They're cheap, they taste good, the kids will actually have them. They've got some basic nutrients. But then when you actually look at it, they'll contain, the reason they taste good is because they're mostly saturated fats, sugary carbs, which kids naturally crave, particularly so after training when they can be really hungry. It's either that, vending machines, or worst of all, it's easier sometimes just to skip meals completely, because by the time they've got home, if they haven't prepped, they've got to shop, they've got to prepare, they've got to cook, then they've got to sit down and eat it, then they've got homework, then they don't want to go to bed on a full stomach. So there's so many issues surrounding the problem that I really just wanted to come up with a creative solution that fits the needs and the values, not only of the parents, but obviously solve the problem for the youth athletes themselves. So we, as Dan said, we're very, very focused on that food first approach. But we do have it a little bit different where it shouldn't or can't sometimes always be food. So what we did is we developed a really nice tasting shake, which is there to do two things. First and foremost, it's there to counter common nutritional deficiencies. And then it also layers in and gives them what they need that separates them nutritionally from adults. Okay. So the shakes themselves are there to complement an already balanced diet, not to replace it. They're not a supplement. They're not a meal replacement. They are literally just food in powdered format. And the main value proposition there is solely convenience, to avoid having to go to get fast food or to avoid skipping meals. It's quick, it's easy. You can shake it up on the go. They taste really good. So from a parent's perspective, it ticks a lot of the boxes. It gives them the reassurance that the kids aren't going to be deficient. They've got everything that they need to perform well, to recover well. That's going to be in alignment with their goals, with their health. And again, it's just thinking more outside the box as a holistic approach. Like some people think it's like a quick fix, or it's, you think powdered shakes as a parent, naturally you think supplements, you think bodybuilding, you think weight loss, you think weight gain, when in reality, these shakes aren't going to do anything for you that a normal meal won't do. The only thing they're going to offer is convenience. So it's just helping parents understand that there is no quick fixes. This fits in alignment with their training, with their sleep, with their recovery, with their wider diet, and that's all going to pull together to kind of help them just kind of get root through that growth phase, obviously still perform well as well, and also still be cost effective if we're talking about that kind of cost of living thing, which I think is impacting everyone at the moment. It's very difficult to kind of get a full complete meal, if you like, for under £2. So again, it ticks another box there. I'm just trying to think what we did eventually is we found a lot of parents struggle, not just kind of the post-game after dinner, but they also struggle with those pre-game nerves. So we basically developed a energy bar, so it's an oat berry bar, which they can have before. Again, it looks high sugar, it is high sugar, but it's a functional food as opposed to being like a snack that you would have normally. So it fits perfectly in alignment with their routine, with their schedule. And then for those days when you've got kids who are super, super picky, they won't even have the shakes. We've got a range of gummies, so multivitamin and omega-3 gummies, which again, just a one a day. It's in a format that kids will actually enjoy. Everything tastes good. So yeah, that's just long story short about the product, but we can really drill into specifics if you want, because it's quite a complicated product.
Lou, I think it's,
but it does solve.
I think
quite
it's
a lot of
genius.
things.
I think it's genius, and I think it's really important what you were saying there about people's perception of what a shake is, because perhaps my generation of mums at some point might have tried or used shakes either because we're in the gym or because we're trying to lose weight, and that isn't what you're designing to do. You're wanting to support a balanced diet, but yet all the things you've said today about the pressure that our children's bodies, when they are elite sports people, are under, means that this has got to have some support. So I think it's brilliant. I think it's really clever. Talk to me then, Dan, about recovery. So we've done the game, we've done the build up in the few days before, or we've done the game, the match, or the big sporting event. What about recovery? Do kids bounce back quicker, and do they need different nutrition because they've done an activity, or do they not really?
Yeah, I think recovery arguably is as important as the build up to the match. Now, kids, you are right in saying there, Kate, that they do bounce back a lot quicker. You know, when we get a little bit older, I certainly feel it now, getting more towards 30 after being a rugby player for many years and playing in an old boys the other week. I certainly didn't bounce back the way I used to when I was at university playing. But, you know, arguably they do bounce back quicker, but that doesn't mean we have to neglect recovery. We're aware that obviously muscle protein synthesis takes a lot less to elicit when it comes to like protein requirements and intake. So, you know, for a general healthy adult, we'll be looking towards kind of 20 and upwards of 60 grams of protein as soon as we can following our exercise session. Whereas with teens and preteens, it tends to be a little bit lower, more around the 5 to 20 grams of protein to elicit muscle protein synthesis, which is quite frankly just a fancy word for regrowth and repair of muscles. However, what the more important side of it is looking towards having energy available. And I think this is where the YSN range comes in very handy, because it doesn't just encompass, I suppose, protein as a kind of recovery product, which most adult supplements do. And I think, Lou, a while back now when we caught up at a conference, and I remember something you said that's really resonated with me with the YSN products is we have baby milk formula and then we have adult supplements, but when Lou created YSN, there was nothing in between. And it's that in between of almost like we can't go giving teenage kids, you know, powdered baby milk, but we can't also go and give them whey protein shakes or, you know, like weight loss shakes, for example. So it's that in between. And that's where I think, you know, the recovery is crucial, that we get carbohydrates and protein as soon as possible. Now, there is a big myth and window around that, you know, if I don't have something within the first 30 minutes after finishing activity, I'm not going to recover from that exercise. True, but also not entirely true. You know, when we look at the recovery window, the sooner we can get food or fuel back into the body to recover, the better it is for our recovery. So for kids, for example, who may recover in a 24-hour window, the sooner we have that consumption of you know, protein and carbs, the quicker that recovery phase starts. Whereas in the other side of things, if we waited 4 or 5 hours because maybe we didn't have food available or we didn't have a YSN kind of product available for us to consume, then our recovery window would just start 4 hours later, because we'd have nothing in the body as a catalyst to create muscle protein synthesis. So most parents start getting really bogged down about the minute their child comes off the pitch, what can they give them? You know, it doesn't have to be all panic stations to start recovery. And actually, as long as we're getting a good hit of carbohydrates and protein, then, you know, we're in a good place. And normally following a match, we'll have some form of meal, and that meal will really serve and act as kind of a top up to the muscle protein synthesis, you know, making sure we've got a good hit of protein within that meal, whether that be chicken or tofu, and, you know, looking towards kind of the simple foods and products that we can utilise from there.
Guys, we could talk all day. I'm conscious that our wonderful listeners who are all leaning in, listening now, are also going, I've got an appointment to be back, but I want to listen to more. So I'm going to ask you, and we're going to probably ask you to come back as well if you'll do it, because I think we've opened this whole realm of kids nutrition, which is absolutely fascinating. But from today, particularly talking in reference to sport, I'd ask you guys just to share sort of your takeaway. What would you want parents to take away from what you've shared? Dan, you go first. What would you want people's takeaway to be?
Yeah, I think keep it simple. You know, arguably there's so much out there on the internet and there's so much conflicting information online, and I think that's where you guys come in really well to kind of clear that up and the noise around it. But it is about keeping it simple. You know, ingredients wise, the shorter the ingredient list, the likelihood the better the product. Keep it simple with our carbs, our fats and our proteins. Energy in versus energy out. I always laugh and say when I started a nutrition degree, my parents said, well, it's just energy in versus energy out. It's not too dissimilar. Most kids will burn up to, you know, 95% of their day-to-day energy every single day. The 5% is the sport they take part in. So if you're a worried parent about fueling your kids correctly, you only really need to be mindful of the extra 5% they might require on a very highly active day. So keep it simple and just make sure that you're listening to your children as well. If they're hungry, it's probably because they're growing and developing. They're not just greedy. So make sure we're feeding them well and feeding them full of the right stuff.
Thank you, Dan. How about you, Lou? What's the takeaway for parents listening in today?
I think a very important takeaway is just to pay close attention to what your kids are actually putting in their body. And then also what sort of mass market media messages they're being exposed to, whether that's in person, on billboards, on the TV, on the internet, on social media. It's very easy nowadays to fall into that comparison trap, particularly so if they are on social media and they're seeing these kind of physical ideals, or they're kind of looking for these like models or whatever. It's really, really dangerous for their self-esteem. So just being like hyper aware of that. And then just kind of helping them realize that there are no shortcuts. Kids have very limited, particularly so the younger ones, they don't have the same capacity to impact body composition as adults do. No such thing as quick fixes. It's just taking that step back, holistic approach, as Dan said, keep it very simple. And then just taking care to educate on the importance of nutrition, how that fits into their lifestyle, keeping them focused on training, kind of setting healthy habits for life, and then obviously looking at the recovery side of things, to work with them to have long-term goals, not just short ones, to help them kind of achieve, instead of forcing them to kind of get that quick fix, and just helping them realize that it is a holistic approach. It is something that it takes time, it takes effort. It's not something that's just going to happen. You're just not going to wake up like that, because you are limited generally by the physiology. Happen naturally with time, with that correct application of nutrition, and then just really focused on setting those strong nutritional pillars or foundations that are going to set them up for success in later life, and not putting too much pressure on it as well.
Guys, thank you. And Dan, you know what, we even got over talking yet about the Leeds United star, who's the rising stars and all that, so you're going to have to tease us with that another time, and we'll get you back to tell us who we need to be watching out for at Leeds. But guys, thank you. Pardon my pun, but food for thought, certainly for us parents out there listening, and for those of us particularly that are behind ferrying, taxiing those child sports stars of the future that have been listening today. So thank you, and thank you both for sharing your time with us. Guys, thank you for joining our Family Health podcast. We would invite you to subscribe to our social channels, the Mini First Aid social channels, and our newsletter, which will keep you up to date with our latest episodes. Also, if you want to see what Dan and Lou look like and you want to watch the podcast, you can view the whole podcast on our YouTube channel. And you can also subscribe via your regular podcast platforms. Also, I should ask, we always do an appeal at the end of our podcast to say that if you have any particular family health related subjects that you would like us to discuss, you want us to go and find the experts. You asked for kids sport nutrition, and we've got these guys in for you today. So if you have particular subjects that you want us to talk about, please send us a message via @MiniFirstAid, and we will seek out for our next series. You've been listening to Family Health Podcast by Mini First Aid. Thank you for listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. I hope you found our podcast really useful and informative. If you want to know more about Mini First Aid classes, courses, qualification courses, or first aid supplies, please do visit minifirstaid.co.uk or look us up on all your favourite social platforms @MiniFirstAid. I take Savlon Scar Prevention Gel everywhere with me so that I am always prepared for the many little and sometimes bigger accidents that my kids encounter. Thank you again to Savlon Scar Prevention Gel for sponsoring Series 3 of the Family Health Podcast.